I'm Ashley. Standing in the newly assigned office that was once a storage room, I'm surrounded by the silence and the faint smell of dust. The sunlight filters through the dirty windows, casting long shadows on the empty floor. This office, now mine, represents a hard-won victory and a new chapter in my life. It all started on that fateful Friday afternoon. My father, Henry, called an emergency board meeting at Sterling Enterprises. He's a man in his late 50s, ambitious and sometimes a bit too headstrong. He built this company from the ground up, but over the years, his management style became more autocratic. My mother, Vivian, is a shrewd and cold-hearted woman in her early 50s. She's always been involved in the company's marketing side, and her presence in the meeting was as intimidating as ever. As I walked into the conference room, I could feel the tension in the air. The room seemed smaller than usual, filled with an oppressive atmosphere. Henry sat at the head of the table, his face set in a determined expression. Vivian sat beside him, her designer suit immaculate, her eyes cold as ice. My older brother, Leo, who is 30 years old, occupied the seat marked Executive Vice President, the position that should have been mine. I took a seat 3 chairs down, next to the intern. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Henry began, his voice carrying that familiar tone of someone who had already made up his mind. "Sterling Enterprises has reached a critical juncture. We've been profitable, but we're not optimized. We're not lean enough for the aggressive expansion this market demands." I took a sip of water, remaining silent. The conference table was made of imported Italian marble, costing more than most people's cars. The chairs were ergonomic masterpieces that Henry had brought in from Germany. The view from the 38th floor overlooked the bustling downtown, but none of this truly belonged to him in the grand scheme of things. "That's why I've brought in Crest Consulting Group," Henry continued, gesturing towards 3 well-dressed men sitting opposite me. The lead consultant, a man with salt and pepper hair named Mr. Gray, stood up. His watch alone was worth more than my car. As he clicked through his presentation, the first slide appeared: Sterling Enterprises restructuring for maximum efficiency. Mr. Gray began, "What we've discovered is an organization burdened by redundant management layers, unclear reporting structures, and several positions that exist more out of historical precedent than operational necessity." Vivian leaned forward, "Tell them about the cost savings." "Our projections indicate that by streamlining management and eliminating redundant positions, Sterling Enterprises could reduce operational costs by 37% while actually improving decision-making speed and market responsiveness," Mr. Gray said. Leo grinned. He'd been waiting for this moment since he joined the company 5 years ago. I'd been with the company for 7 years, but I'd never made a big deal about titles or corner offices. I just focused on my work, managed my projects, and somehow became invisible in the process. "The key, Mr. Gray continued, is to consolidate authority in a clear chain of command. One vision, one direction, no confusion about who makes final decisions." Another slide showed the new organizational chart. Henry was at the top, Leo directly below as President and Chief Operating Officer, and then a row of department heads. My name appeared in a small box labeled Special Projects Coordinator, a demotion of 3 levels. "Now, I know some of you might be concerned about these changes," Henry said, his tone suggesting he didn't really care about our concerns. "But this is about the future of this company. My father built Sterling Enterprises from scratch. I've grown it into what it is today, and Leo will take it to new heights. This requires sacrifice and tough decisions. Starting with unnecessary staff," Vivian added, looking directly at me for the first time since the meeting began. The room fell silent. Everyone knew what unnecessary staff meant. The intern beside me shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Gray smoothly said, "We'll be offering generous severance packages. For those whose positions are being restructured, 3-month salary, continuation of benefits, and outplacement services." I carefully set down my water glass. The sound of the glass on the marble seemed incredibly loud. Any questions? Henry asked in a tone that made it clear questions would be seen as insubordination. James from accounting tentatively raised his hand. What's the timeline for these changes? Effective immediately, Leo said, speaking for the first time. We're announcing the new structure on Monday. The transition will be complete within 2 weeks. This is about efficiency, Henry repeated. Some people understand business and what it takes to compete at this level. Others, he paused, looking at me, are better suited to different, less demanding environments. Vivian actually smiled. Perhaps something in education or non-profit work, something that matches your capabilities. I pulled out my phone and sent a single text message. Then I looked up at Henry, at Vivian, at Leo with his smug expression, and at Mr. Gray and his team of consultants who were clearly looking to pad their own fees. Are these changes already filed with the parent company? I asked quietly. Henry frowned. What? The restructuring plan, the new organizational chart, the terminations, have they been submitted to the holding company for approval? Mr. Gray looked confused. There's a holding company? Of course, there's no holding company, Henry said irritably. Sterling Enterprises is privately held. I own it. This is my decision to make. Actually, I said, still speaking quietly, Sterling Enterprises is a wholly owned subsidiary of Sterling Holdings LLC. All major structural changes, any modifications to the organizational hierarchy, and any terminations above the level of department head require written approval from the holding company's board of directors. The room went dead silent. That's a technicality, Leo said. Some legal structure Dad set up for tax purposes years ago. It doesn't actually mean anything. It means that none of these changes can take effect without approval, I continued. It also means that this meeting, which was called as a board meeting, isn't actually a board meeting at all because the board of directors of Sterling Enterprises reports to the board of directors of Sterling Holdings, and no representatives from the holding company are present. Henry's face turned red. This is ridiculous. I'm not going to. His phone rang. He looked at the screen, frowned, and answered. Yes. I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but I could see his expression change from irritation to confusion to concern. What do you mean rejected? I haven't even submitted anything yet, he said into the phone. He listened for a long moment. How would they even know about? Yes. Yes, I understand. I'll call you back. He ended the call and stared at me. Really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. That was our corporate attorney, he said slowly. He just received a call from the holding company's legal team. Apparently, someone forwarded them the restructuring proposal, and it's been rejected. All of it? That's impossible, Vivian said. The holding company is just paperwork. It's not a real thing. My phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and stood up. If you'll excuse me, I need to take this call. I walked to the windows overlooking the city. Behind me, I could hear Henry demanding explanations, Leo insisting it was all a misunderstanding, and Vivian talking about calling their lawyers. Hello, Robert, I said into the phone. Miss Sterling, the voice on the other end replied, I've sent the formal rejection notice to your father's attorney. The restructuring proposal violates at least 6 clauses in the subsidiary operating agreement. Should I schedule a meeting to review the compliance requirements? Please do. Let's say Monday morning, 9 a.m. In Conference Room A. Conference Room A is reserved for board meetings only. I know. I ended the call and turned back to the room. Everyone was staring at me. I don't understand, Henry said. How did the holding company even know about this meeting? Because I told them, I said simply. I'm on the board of directors. I've been on the board since my grandfather died and left me his shares. The silence was absolute. That's impossible, Leo said. Grandfather left everything to Dad. He left the shares of Sterling Enterprises to Dad. I corrected him. He left the shares of Sterling Holdings to me. All of them. Mr. Gray was looking between his notes and me with growing alarm. When you say all of them, I mean I own 100% of Sterling Holdings LLC, which owns 100% of Sterling Enterprises. Every share, every asset, every decision ultimately requires my approval. Vivian had gone pale. But he never said anything. You never. I never interfered, I said. Grandfather's will included a letter. He told me to let Dad run the company, to learn the business from the ground up, to understand every department before I ever exercised my authority. He said if I did it right, the company would run itself. And if you did it wrong, I looked at Henry, then I'd know exactly what needed to change when the time came. I walked back to my seat but didn't sit down. I stood behind the chair, my hands resting on the German-made ergonomic leather. For 7 years, I've worked in this company. I've managed projects, coordinated teams, and solved problems. I've watched how decisions are made, how people are treated, what gets prioritized, and what gets ignored. I've learned a lot. You've been spying, Leo accused. I've been learning. There's a difference, I replied. I looked at Mr. Gray. Your consulting firm was hired without proper authorization. The holding company requires competitive bids for any consulting contracts over $50,000. Your engagement letter was for $300,000. That contract is void. Mr. Gray stood up. We have a signed agreement with Sterling Enterprises, but it lacks the authority to enter into contracts of that size without holding company approval. Check your contract. Section 12. It's standard boilerplate, but it matters. You'll receive a kill fee for work performed to date, but your recommendations are rejected, and your services are no longer required. The 3 consultants looked at each other, then began packing their materials. They left without another word. Now wait just a minute, Henry started. The restructuring plan is rejected, I said. Not just rejected, it's prohibited. The holding company's operating agreement specifically forbids any changes to executive compensation, organizational structure, or staffing levels that would interfere with the subsidiary's operational independence without board approval. And since I am the board and I don't approve, it's not happening. This is insane, Vivian said. You can't just. I can actually, but I don't want to. I don't want to run Sterling Enterprises. I don't want Dad's job or Leo's job. I just want to do my work without being called unnecessary staff in a room full of my colleagues. However, I continued, since this meeting has made it clear that there are some fundamental misunderstandings about corporate governance and authority, we need to address them. Effective immediately, all executive decisions above the department head level will be reviewed by the holding company's legal team before implementation. This includes hiring, firing, compensation changes, capital expenditures over $100,000, and any contracts with outside consultants. You're putting us in handcuffs, Leo said. I'm ensuring compliance with the corporate structure that's been in place for 7 years. The structure you all apparently forgot existed. Henry's phone rang again. He looked at it but didn't answer. That's probably Robert again, I said. Our corporate attorney, he's very thorough. He'll want to schedule a comprehensive review of all major decisions made in the last 3 years to ensure they were properly authorized. Some of them might need to be ratified retroactively. Some of them might need to be corrected. Corrected how? Henry asked. Well, for example, the compensation package Leo received when he was promoted to executive vice president. That was a 40% increase plus equity grants plus a company car. All of that required holding company approval. None of that received holding company approval. Leo went pale. I'm not saying it won't be approved, I added. I'm just saying it needs to go through the proper channels. Everything needs to go through the proper channels. That's how corporate governance works. Vivian stood up suddenly. This is ridiculous. You can't treat your father this way after everything he's done for you. What has he done for me? I asked, genuinely curious. Given me a job, paid me a salary? That's not a gift, that's employment. I work hard. I deliver results. I've earned every dollar. What I haven't earned is being called unnecessary staff in front of my colleagues because Dad wanted to give Leo a bigger empire to rule. That's not what this was about, Henry said, but his voice lacked conviction. No. Then what was it about? Efficiency? We're profitable. We're growing. Customer satisfaction is at an all-time high. The efficiency problem only exists in Mr. Gray's PowerPoint presentation. This was about consolidating power, eliminating anyone who might question decisions, and creating a clear path for Leo to take over without any complications. I looked at Leo. He was staring at the table. I'm not the complication, Leo. The complication is that you want to run a company you don't own, report to no one, and make decisions without oversight. That's not how this works. My phone buzzed again. I glanced at it. That's Robert. He needs me to sign off on some documents. The board meeting, the actual board meeting of Sterling Holdings, is scheduled for Monday at 9 a.m. All executive leadership of Sterling Enterprises is required to attend. We'll be reviewing the subsidiary operating agreement, discussing compliance requirements, and establishing new protocols for major decisions. I picked up my bag. One more thing. That office you're sitting in, Dad, it's a beautiful office. Corner view, private bathroom, that expensive mahogany desk that cost $40,000. The lease is in the holding company's name. So is the lease for this entire floor. So is the lease for the company apartments, the executive parking spaces, and the corporate jet that Leo has been using for weekend trips. I'm not taking any of that away. I'm not interested in being petty, but I want you to remember every single day that everything you think you own, every bit of authority you think you have exists because I allow it to exist. Not because you earned it. Not because you deserve it. Because I choose not to interfere. Why? Henry asked. Why would you let us believe we were in control? Because Grandfather asked me to. Because I wanted to learn. Because I hoped that maybe eventually you'd see me as something other than unnecessary staff. I smiled, but there was no humor in it. I guess we both learned something today. I left the conference room. Behind me, there was silence, then the sound of Henry's phone ringing again. The weekend passed in a blur of phone calls and legal documents. Robert worked overtime preparing materials for Monday's meeting. The subsidiary operating agreement was a thick document full of clauses and requirements that Henry had apparently never read despite signing it 7 years ago. This is fascinating, Robert said during one of our calls. Your grandfather basically created a corporate structure that gave your father complete operational freedom as long as he managed the company responsibly, but retained ultimate control at the holding company level. It's actually brilliant. Your father could do anything he wanted except fire you, reorganize the executive structure, or fundamentally alter how the company operates. He didn't know you owned the holding company. Even more brilliant. Your grandfather wanted you to learn whether your father would treat employees fairly when he thought no one was watching. Apparently, the answer is no. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. I got to the office at 7:30 and went straight to conference room A, the boardroom, the one I'd never been invited to before. Robert was already there, setting up presentations and organizing documents. Everyone's confirmed attendance, he said. Your father, your mother, Leo, and the 4 department heads who were in Friday's meeting. Also, I took the liberty of inviting Sterling Enterprises CFO and General Counsel. They should be present for this discussion. Good thinking. At 8:55, people began arriving. Henry came in first, looking like he hadn't slept. Vivian was with him, her expression carefully neutral. Leo arrived exactly at 9 o'clock, followed by the others. I sat at the head of the table. Henry started to sit in his usual spot, my spot, then caught himself and chose a different chair. Thank you all for coming, I began. This is the quarterly board meeting of Sterling Holdings, LLC. For those who weren't aware, such a meeting was required and has been required for the past 7 years. This is the first one we've actually held, which means we have a lot to cover. I nodded to Robert. The first order of business, Robert said, is to review the subsidiary operating agreement between Sterling Holdings and Sterling Enterprises. I'm distributing copies now. Please turn to page 12, section 4. 3. Papers rustled. People read. I watched their faces as they began to understand the implications. As you can see, Robert continued, all major operational decisions require holding company approval. This includes structural reorganizations, executive compensation above certain thresholds, capital expenditures over $100,000, any acquisitions or divestitures, and terminations of executive-level personnel. The CFO, a man named David who'd been with the company for 15 years, raised his hand tentatively. Does this mean every decision we've made has been potentially unauthorized? Not necessarily, I said. Decisions made in the ordinary course of business, within the scope of normal operations, are fine. But extraordinary decisions, the kind that would fundamentally change how the company operates, those required approval that was never sought. Because no one knew the holding company was real, Leo said bitterly. Because no one read the operating agreement they signed, I corrected. Because no one bothered to check the corporate structure because everyone assumed that having the title CEO meant having ultimate authority when the corporate documents clearly state otherwise. Henry cleared his throat.